applause for him, please.
All right. Yeah, hi, I'm Daniel. I'm the Solidity Team lead ever since Chris stepped down last year. And yeah, I'll talk, as Francis said, about, that works better, about what happened in Solidity the last year. But let me start with how the Solidity team currently actually looks. So we lost Chris to the CK world and to Powder rather early this year already. So these days, our most senior developer is Camille, who, yeah, I would appreciate applause for Camille, because nothing would keep working without Camille's everlasting contributions. We will actually probably declare him technical co-lead in the future, because that's the role that he has been having for quite a while now, de facto. Make that official in the soon future. Then we have Mateus, Nicola, and Rodrigo, also up front here, who are our new developers who by now actually know their way around the repository and this language as well, and can start reasonably contributing and bringing us forward as well. We have the ecosystem and community team with Franzi and our newly hired developer advocate Wish over here. And most recently, Nick, who we hired off the dying truffle as our debug data special expert and working group lead. Okay, now to actually summarize what happened last year. I've listed on the left some random subset of features that we had. For unchecked for loop increments and user-defined operators, I will have dedicated slides in a second. Then also we restricted relaxed the restrictions on immutables. That was actually due to those restrictions being buggy, but then we dropped them entirely because they were unnecessary in the first place. Mapping parameters, also minor, and qualified and file level events, also minor improvements on the language side, but also appreciated by some people. Hard fork support for Shanghai and Paris, also not that much that happened in those forks, but actually renaming opcodes like difficulty to preferent DAO is more of a headache compatibility-wise than one may actually think. And push 0 is actually also more of a headache optimizer-wise than one might think, so that actually took some doing, even though the hard forks were not that large. Via our performance and stability, I will defer to Nicola's talk in 2 talks. We also had a full implementation of EOF in the end of last year. Unfortunately, all quarters then in the end decided not to pursue that for now, so that's still a branch. You can hope for the future that there will be a new revision of EOF that will actually make it on to a hard fork, but that's unclear as of now. A big part of work has gone into an experimental Solidity prototype, which I will talk more about in the last talk today. Now, as for features, unchecked for loop increments is basically a reaction to this horrible pattern, pattern that has emerged in the top. Ever since we introduced checked arithmetic, people tended to do that, since in a loop like this, checking the increment for overflows is unnecessary. It turns out it's actually not trivial to do that in the optimizer on the UL level, so this is our first experiment with actually analyzing Solidity code, having some conditions. I won't go into detail right now. You can look it up in a blog post and in our documentation what the precise conditions are in which this optimization kicks in. But it means in the end that one can actually write non-pathological for loops again. So that's nice. User-defined operators, also a nice feature that happened last year. Bit controversial in the sense that people were afraid of this making the language less auditable and less readable. But if you actually look into how we implemented this, I mean, would imagine you have seen this by now, that we can define user-defined value types, restricted to value types only for now, then define functions on that, where you can actually access the underlying type of that defined type by specially introduced functions, and then attach functions as operators for this type. The restrictions we have on that is that these operators are monoidal, so they only depend on one variable type. So this plus needs to be a plus on the same type, plus the same type, returning the same type. That means that if you know any of the types involved in an expression, you will know all types and can uniquely identify the function. So that's what makes this not explode in complexity in understanding code, but still adds convenience to the user who wants to have more readable additions on user-defined types or other operators. Okay, so far as to what happened. What will happen as planned next year is something that will be covered in the next talks. The first thing on my list here is that the ETH debug format that was planned to already have been stabilized this year will hopefully finally stabilize now. Nick will talk about that after me. Then also via IR. Last year when I talked about that in Bogota, the first question was what is via IR? I hope that more people are aware of that now. In case they aren't, Nicola will talk about that after Nick. We will make this the default. We've wanted to do that for quite a while, but we will do that in the 1st of June next year. So you need to be aware of that. Otherwise, we do not plan to have significant feature development in the current stable version of Solidity. We will rather focus on experimental Solidity, which will be the longer-term evolution of the language. I will talk about that. You will probably have questions about that. I will talk about that in detail at the end of today. I want to emphasize that. VIR will be the default. We will not back down from that 1st of June 2024. If you develop tools, check whether your tools work with VIR compilation. If you rely on bytecode patterns, they will change and will probably not be a reliable source of heuristics for your tools. Check that. If you run into that, get in touch with our ETH debugging data working group, led by Nick over here. You will hear about in the next talk. And let us help you by emitting the data about the bytecode that you need, rather than trying to use heuristics that will break with VIR code generation. All right. I already mentioned we will focus on experimental Solidity. That means that previously promised and anticipated features will not happen in the immediate future. That includes things like the code data location or compile time constant expression evaluation, a more flexible storage layout, and so on. The reasoning here is that these features will be able to be, or can be implemented much faster and more securely in the next revision of the language, which, I'll talk about later today. All right. What we also would like to get feedback today on is the candidates for deprecation and end-of-lifing in the compiler. On the language level itself, we will not do that outside the breaking releases that we target. One of them will be the VIR default release. But there's also non-language level code fragments in our compiler that we would like to get rid of, but we will want to give everybody the chance to weigh in on whether they still rely on that. So for example, we already deprecated EVM versions older than Constantinople. If anybody for any purpose relies on the Solidity compiler supporting that continually, let us know. Also, release avenues. We release Ubuntu PPA releases. We have a custom homebrew repository and Docker releases. None of them we expect to be actually in use. So we would like to spare us the headache of maintaining all of these. From our perspective, we expect that almost all use of the compiler is through some framework that will fetch the compilers through different avenues, our binaries.soliditylang.org distribution system, and not through these avenues. Docker may be an exception, but we have static releases that will basically serve the same purpose as Docker releases without the overhead of Docker. But if anybody relies on any of that, let us know. Also, the command line interface, that would also be something that would be very interesting to us if somebody for some scripts for some tooling integration actually uses this command line interface and not the standard JSON interface that is usually recommended for tooling use. Depending on that, we would more or less aggressively change that. But yeah, that's as far as I would go for now. So I would be open for questions. Otherwise, I would head over to Nick after that. Well, thank you so far.
So if there are any questions, please raise your hand. If not, maybe they will come after the experimental Solidity talk. Thanks so much.